Hi, my name's Emily, and in my author spotlight, I'm going to be talking about R.L. Stine. First, I'm going to talk about his family and early life. Here's a bit about his early life. R.L. Stine was born in Columbus, Ohio on October 8, 1943. He has two siblings, a younger brother and a younger sister. His mom was a homemaker and his father was a shipping clerk. Stine mentions that he grew up very poor. He quotes, "We were very poor. I had to wear my cousin's old clothes to school. I think it made me very shy. It's one reason I liked staying in my room and writing." Continuing with his early life, Stine started writing when he was about 9 years old. He found an old typewriter in his family's attic and he started writing joke books and stories. His mother begged him to go outside and play, but he preferred staying in his room and using the typewriter. He wasn't your typical kid that went outside all the time with his friends. I actually saw on a website that he was really bad at PE in school and that his favorite sport to play was ping pong. Stine said in an interview, "My mother would stand outside my door and she'd say, 'What's wrong with you? Go outside and play.' And I'd say, 'It's boring out there.'" Stine was not exactly a perfect student, but he managed to get mostly B's on his report cards. He didn't work very hard in school and spent most of his time writing stories and drawing comics. He originally thought of being a comic book artist, but then he didn't really have much talent when it came to drawing. Stine graduated college in 1965 from Ohio State University. In 1969, Stine married Jane Waldhorn. Jane became a writer and an editor, and they worked on several books together. Jane and her business partner created a publishing company called the Parachute Press. They later helped create all of R.L. Stine's most popular book series. And with that, I'm going to get into Stine's early career as a writer. While going to college and University of Ohio, he was an editor for the school's humor magazine called The Sundial. In 1967, Stine headed to New York City to become a writer. He started working at Scholastic, writing some school magazines, and then he started writing joke and humor books for kids. Around this time, he wrote under the alias of Jovial Bob Stine. I found it very interesting that he wrote humor and joke books because I wouldn't have thought that, like, originally knowing him as just a horror author, but I can definitely see it in some of the books that he wrote, especially within the Goosebumps series. Now I'm going to get into some of his earlier works. Some of the comedy and more funny type works include How to Be Funny, The Sick of Being Sick book, 101 Creepy Creature Jokes, and Banana Magazine, which was a humor magazine that he wrote and edited himself for 10 years. There was also Blind Date, which is where he first started to dip into the horror genre. It was his first teen horror novel. It was an instant bestseller, and it was followed by Beach House, The Babysitter, Hit and Run, and a lot more. Now I'm going to talk about his two well-known horror book series. First, we're going to look at Fear Street. Stine created Fear Street in 1989. It quickly became one of the best-selling young adult series in history. It includes over 100 books, and 6 new Fear Street titles were recently created. Next, we're going to talk about Goosebumps. Everybody knows Goosebumps. I personally used to read a lot of Goosebumps as a kid. and I was very interested in getting like when it started, the background on it, and how it came about. The series started in 1992 and it quickly gained popularity all over the world, making Stine a publishing celebrity. Goosebumps has two movies and a TV show adaptation that can still be watched on Netflix. It was one of the number one kids shows in America, and there are over 130 titles in the series, and more are currently being created. Now I'm going to talk a bit about the most popular books that came from these two series. The first book I'm going to get into is Fear Street, The New Girl. It was actually the first novel in R.L. Stine's Fear Street series, and it was written in 1989, making it one of the earliest novels that he wrote. A summary of the story is a boy named Corey falls in love with the new girl that came to his high school named Anna. He tells his friends about her, but they don't really know who he's speaking about, and he starts losing sleep, skipping practices, acting all different, and he can't find any trace of this girl in the school's files. Little does he know, she's actually dead. The next story I'm going to talk about is Goosebumps, Night of the Living Dummy. The summary is two sisters named Chris and Lindy find a dummy while inspecting a container of trash near a house that's under construction. Lindy decides to keep the dummy and name him Slappy. She quickly gains popularity because of Slappy, and Chris doesn't like all the attention her sister's getting, becomes jealous. Then she decides to get a dummy for herself, and strange things start to happen. The character Slappy is a ventriloquist dummy that gains sentience because he's cursed by an evil sorcerer, and he can do things like teleport, he has human intelligence. Some fun facts about Slappy are that he is the most popular villain in the series. He has 18 books that he appears in. Some of these are included in his own Goosebumps series called Goosebumps Slappy World. The next story that I'm going to talk about is Goosebumps The Haunted Mask. It's about a girl named Carly that goes to buy the scariest mask she could find in a store for Halloween, and it's from the off limits section in the store, which is already kind of like a bad sign, you know? And she buys it because she wants to scare her brother and her friend that keep scaring her. When she puts on the mask, she begins to act different, her voice gets deeper, and she starts becoming violent. She later tries to remove the mask, but to her horror, she discovers it's stuck to her face. Now I'm going to show this video of an interview where R.L. Stine is talking about his inspiration for two of his books.
Well, you've written so many books. Here at the Library of Congress, this is the largest library in the world. And when we go into the card catalog here at the library and try to get a sense of how many books has a particular author written, we're used to seeing, a handful. Well, when we did a search on R.L. Stine in the library's catalog, we found hundreds of titles. So we're curious. Where do all of your ideas come from?
I don't know. Where do they come from? Where do your ideas come
Well,
from?
and how do you
We all get ideas, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. Here, I will tell you, how many of you have read The Haunted Mask? Or have you seen the TV show of The Haunted Mask? That's a Halloween story. It's about a girl named Carly Beth who wants to be scary at Halloween time. And she tries on this very scary mask, and it sticks to her face. And she can't get it off, and it becomes her face, and it turns her evil. And I will tell you where the idea came from for that story.
Yeah.
It actually came from my son Matt when he was a little guy. It was Halloween, and I was watching Matt. He was down on the floor trying on a green rubber Frankenstein mask. And he pulled it down over his head, and he couldn't get it off. And I'm watching from the doorway, and he's down there, and he's tugging, and he's tugging. And I thought, what a great idea. I should have helped him, right? Instead, I went and started making notes and saying, oh, great idea for a story.
Perfect.
And poor Matt is still in the mask. It's a very sad story. That's where that one came from.
I love it.
You never know where you're going to get ideas.
You're right.
One day I was walking my dog in the park, and these words popped into my head. Say cheese and die. I thought, what? Wait, what? Why? Why did those words? And then I started thinking, well, what if there was an evil camera? What if some kids discovered the camera? And what if the camera took pictures of bad things that happened to you a little bit in the future? And that's how that book, Say Cheese and Die, got started, just from those words popping into my head.
And it became a whole
So,
book.
yeah, you never know. You never know where ideas are going to come from.
Well, when you have a unique idea, one of the other functions, I mentioned that the Library of Congress is the largest library in the world. We're also home to the U.S. Copyright.
Now I'm going to jump into the reading discussion on R.L. Stine's Goosebumps, Say Cheese and Die. In this story, a boy named Greg and his friends find an old camera and decide to keep it. They start snapping photos only to discover that the photos don't exactly come out right. After taking pictures, Greg figures out that the pictures predict a horrible future, or they even cause the horrible future. Now onto the discussion for the reading. The questions I have are, what elements of horror did you find in the Say Cheese and Die excerpt? And in what ways does R.L. Stine tell a horror story that is appropriate for children to read? For the first question, the elements of horror that I found in the story are feelings of fear, anxiety, dread, discomfort, supernatural events, and taking something familiar and safe feeling and making it different and scary to the reader. The supernatural events being the camera itself. For example, it's causing all these crazy events to happen, like the main character's father getting into the car accident, and near the end of the excerpt, his friend disappearing after he takes the photo and she doesn't show up in it. The camera being a normal and familiar, object you see throughout your life, and taking that and making it something different and frightening really evokes a feel of fear and anxiety in the reader, and sometimes dread and discomfort too. For the second question, in what ways does R.L. Stine tell a horror story that is appropriate for children to read? I think that he does this effectively through not having gore or anything in it. He makes his stories very PG and friendly to a young reader. He still evokes fear and discomfort in them through the supernatural and unknown things. He also includes monsters, and he adds elements of suspense in his work. What he does in his work is that he opts to scare the reader and not scar them with something gory or anything that's violent. And because of this, he is so effective at telling a horror story that's appropriate for children. So that's the end of my presentation on R.L. Stine, and here's all my sources. Thank you.